The United States has been one of the most powerful countries, but also one of the major colonizers in the past century. And because of that pain of the political relationships that the US has had with Latin America and the Caribbean, there is a hate towards the US and how they do politics and how they do business between countries.
And I want to touch on that word colonizer for a second and gringo, because gringo wasn't a slur, but it's becoming like a slur. Colonizer is definitely a slur. And, you know, I understand the pain of what has happened in the last 5 centuries. The atrocities that have happened are horrible. They've really been put on European Americans, but humans are the apex predator on the planet. And they have been assholes to one another since the beginning. You know, the number one group that has actually won the most wars and had the most killing is the Asian community, right? And if you look that up, they're number one. They've done it. But we never talk about the colonization that they've done, right? We only talk about the colonization that's happened with European Americans. And I'm not condoning it. It's absolutely terrible. It's just that none of us have anything to do with what happened 5 centuries ago. We're here living in the present moment, dealing with present day problems. But if you look at the first colonizer of Puerto Rico, because I really wanted to understand the history, it was God, right? There was nobody here, right? It was his island for humans, for earthlings. And then you had the Casamaroid people that came up through the Antilles, then the Ortoroid people that came up through the Antilles that eliminated the Casamaroids, then the Corozo people that eliminated the Ortoroids, and then you had the Arawak Indians that came in, and they became the Tainos, and they eliminated the Corozo. So you had 4 generations of immigrants before the Spaniards ever got here. But that narrative is never told. We're just told that the Spaniards are the ones that colonized. And again, the things that happened are absolutely horrible. But Native Americans were battling for land as well. That's part of history, and that's part of history that's not spoken about. You know, now that we're here in the present moment, we've got to find a way to be able to work together and not repeat the past that we're living in today. And so the word colonizer really shows that someone is uneducated because they are not sharing the entire story from the beginning of time.
Well, I tend to disagree with your perception of the word colonizer. I think that it's not a slur. It's just a reality. You know, a nation that colonizes another nation is a nation that is more powerful than the other one and takes advantage of its resources in an unequal relationship. And throughout history, Britain has been one of the main colonizers as well. And there is a lot of resentment in the countries that Britain colonized because of the abuse that they endured. And similarly, the U.S. colonized Puerto Rico in 1898. And there was a lot of things that the U.S. government did. To name a few, they utilized Puerto Ricans for cancer research, and they utilized Puerto Ricans as guinea pigs, and they radiated them. They utilized prisoners. They utilized women for research for birth controls, and many women reported to be infertile after that. So there is pain, and these people aren't people that are, not all of them are dead. There's people that are still alive that went through this. In the 1930s, Spanish was outlawed in public schools, and you could only speak English in public schools. So a lot of people stopped sending their kids to school because their kids were frustrated because they didn't understand the language. So these attacks to us as human beings and us as a culture, because you need to understand, yes, Spain did colonize Puerto Rico, but after a certain amount of time, the African, the Taino, and the Spanish people mixed together and they became Puerto Ricans. They became a national identity. And at that point, historically, is where we start with the fact that the U.S. came in and wanted to take that away from Puerto Ricans as a whole. And that is where the pain is coming from. So to call the United States a colonizer, it is a reality. We do not have an equal relationship with the United States. We need to go beg to Congress for anything that we receive. And we do not have representation that is equal. So there is pain in the relationship that we have with the U.S. I think that we do have to separate things, right? Because you, Alex, or you, Jesse, didn't come personally. and
I've never
colonize.
been on a boat. I never carried a musket. I never, you know what
Absolutely,
I mean? Like,
absolutely, and I think that's where I empathize with the U.S. citizens from the mainland that move, and I want to emphasize U.S. citizens because the reality is we're all Americans from Canada down to Argentina, and Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. The difference is that we don't live in the mainland. So people that come from the mainland to live in Puerto Rico did not colonize us. But what brings up the pain for a lot of people is the fact that there are resources that we have not been able to exploit ourselves because the government puts 1,000 boundaries for them, or because we don't have the financial resources to them. And there is some type of pain when you see that someone else is being able to exploit them. And
yeah,
I can understand that. My issue is that if it's for the betterment of Puerto Rico, I can look past the fact that certain properties aren't owned by Puerto Ricans anymore, because ultimately we are getting a trickle down benefit. And I think that that's where I wish the Gringo Go Home movement would understand that in certain circumstances, you do need external capital to move a country forward. And in our case, just look at the power infrastructure. If we had an actual competitive process where a power company would come in and compete and be transparent with that competition, and they would completely restore our power grid, the country would be completely different.
hmm
But we're fighting Luma and we're fighting the government, and I don't see someone actually bringing forward solutions.